Well, hello there, beautiful. So ever since switching to Ryzen as our primary workstation workhorse for video production and gaming, etc., people have been asking if it's been worth it. Both Eber and I utilize the 1700X CPU, an 8-core 16-thread monster, and it really chews through rendering videos and, gaming is fine. The main question that I'm here to answer, if it's been worth it for me. Now, I think 3 months is a good time frame to understand the capabilities of this ecosystem, but also understand and discover its drawbacks. So let's talk about all that right after this.
Wondering how to fix a boring fan? Check out Halos RGB. They are super slim fan frames that light up your blades of any shade, come in 120 and 140mm sizes to fit any fan, and are controlled through your motherboard or your Fantex case. Available in beautiful aluminum or simple plastic, it's time to Halos your build. Outline what matters.
So I want to start off by saying, if you have not seen our original video of switching to Ryzen from my previous Intel-based machine, make sure to check it out. A lot of insightful information on why we made the switch in the first place, and give you a really good reference point as to how much performance gain we got in Premiere for rendering videos. Now, the main benefit for me with Ryzen really came through multitasking that I was not able to do before, because it would really slow down render times. So now I could be rendering a video in the background, working on the thumbnail in Photoshop, watching a 4K video from Eber, for example, downloading games on Steam, all that without impacting too much on the render times. And what you can see from this graph is that additional time saved in render times while doing all these other things in the background. But as many people pointed out, that render times is not everything. So while you could be rendering things in 10 minutes versus 20 minutes, what's performance like in real life scrubbing on a timeline with 4K footage and all that? And that's when things get interesting.
So for my Premiere workflow, I edit with proxies, which means lower resolution files are used in the timeline that deliver much smoother scrubbing. I can cut faster, and most importantly, preview my edit without any stutter, since 4K files with some color and other effects applied are really difficult to preview in real time without dropped frames. So this is when my machines start to act up and drop frames like crazy, even using proxies on my Ryzen machine. What's more interesting is that I dropped more frames when using the proxies, those lower resolution files, than using actual 4K files. So something definitely was wrong.
Now, the reason why dropped frames are the enemy for every editor is because when I'm trying to preview my timeline, I want the playback to be as smooth as possible. So I know exactly when to cut it, I can edit to the music easier, and just becomes a really nice and seamless process. But if we're dropping frames, the footage is stuttering, it's not playing back in real time, it's like gaming at like 2 FPS. It's really annoying. It was really getting to a point where I had my Intel-based machine, which I now use for case reviews, kind of ready on standby in case I need to swap out my system and just continue on editing without all these kind of like slowdowns that I was experiencing before. Even though my render times would be slower, at least my performance on the timeline would be significantly better, especially when I'm using proxies.
And for gaming in general, I'm totally fine with the performance, especially since I'm running a GTX 1080 at almost 2 GHz. But for example, of where my Skylake system was far superior is when you need really high frame rate, like when I reviewed a 240Hz display, and my Ryzen system wasn't able to reach stable 240Hz FPS in CSGO at low settings, whereas my 6700K could easily reach 300 plus. And on my Ryzen machine, I experienced a few really bad frame drops in the middle of gameplay in CSGO, which I've never experienced on my Intel machine.
What's more is I was experiencing unexpected crashes while rendering videos, even though my temperatures and voltages were all sort of in line and not out of boundaries to cause these issues. But then on one of the crashes, my Intel NVMe SSD on which the OS is installed was not being recognized until I pulled it out, switched some slots, and then even tried it on a different machine, only for it to work again after inserting it and resetting the CMOS and resetting the BIOS and all that stuff. However, the one piece of information I haven't told you is that when I did that swap from Intel to Ryzen, my OS drive, I didn't format it, I simply plugged it in and I did a Windows reset or some refresh where it keeps all my files but just does a clean sort of refresh of Windows. But AMD recommends a complete format of the OS drive so that it reinstalls everything completely fresh. And so I was hoping that that was the baseline of all my issues and it was time to do a clean Windows install.
And ever since doing that clean Windows install, updating to the latest BIOS, running the latest AMD drivers, I have not experienced any crashes or unusual behavior for my video production work or gaming. So proxy workflow in Premiere is back to normal, it's flawless, no hiccups or dropped frames, and the new BIOS brings stability and slightly wider memory compatibility, so I can run 3200 MHz on the memory on some Ryzen tested kits.
And so the Ryzen platform is updating, which is awesome, but I've never had to worry about higher speed memory compatibility on my Intel machines, nor have I needed to update the BIOS as much as I have on Ryzen. We also found out that some hardware is not even tested on AMD platform, like this 2.5-inch external enclosure by Silverstone. I was gonna use this to house my SSDs and being able to freely move my system from case to case without having to worry of migrating my storage as well. But there's something wrong with the SATA signal strength on Ryzen motherboards, whereas on Intel platform, this thing works just fine. We've also stumbled upon weird behavior using the USB 3.1 Gen 2 port on the Ryzen motherboard versus on my Skylake machine using this M.2 SSD inside the Gen 2 enclosure. Everything is fine, the speeds are great. On the Ryzen motherboard, we get slower speeds and inconsistent results throughout our testing. And if you guys are interested to see how to build your own M.2 SSD USB stick, check it out right over here. I also found out that Ryzen is really unoptimized for Adobe Lightroom, which is a really popular app for photographers. So just zooming in to get the full resolution preview takes a while. Changing any of the exposure settings really takes a toll on the system, and they take a while to load as well. And just switching between pictures take a really long time for them to load again. It's really sluggish and just an unpleasant experience from where I'm coming from using my Skylake machine or even using my MacBook Pro that feels faster in every regard with Adobe Lightroom. I've also experienced more than normal bugs in Adobe Premiere, which is unfortunate, but I think it's related to NVIDIA drivers since they come out so frequently with all these new games that there must be some incompatibility with Adobe. So I reverted to an older driver that I know works fine, and I haven't had any issues since. Now, my overclocking journey to 4 GHz has not been entirely successful, and you can check out that failure of a video here. I'm giving it enough cooling with a Darkrock Pro 3 cooler. There's enough voltage in there as well, but maybe I'm just not as lucky with my 1700X. Eber has his running at 4 GHz, no problem, but maybe I'm just not as lucky. I've settled at 3.8 GHz, which I'm happy with, and at 66 MHz on the memory. And so in contrast to my previous Intel experience, Ryzen 7 doesn't look that great in terms of early stability issues, difficulties with overclocking, and unoptimized app performance for really important apps. So that might suggest that you should avoid Ryzen, right? No, because despite these platform issues, I can still do more things and render videos faster with Ryzen 7. Now, I've done this fun calculation where in the past 3 months, I've rendered 41 videos with a total of 321 minutes of 4K footage. I render at least 2 versions of each video, so that's 642 minutes, and my render speed on Ryzen is about 2x of the length of the sequence, so that means my machine has spent roughly 1284 minutes rendering video projects, or about 21 hours of render time. And based on my calculations on how fast this Skylake machine was rendering, I've saved over 10 hours on render times, and that's why Ryzen has been definitely worth it. And what I started doing recently with the time savings is actually increasing the bitrate of my exports, so the video quality is much higher, and I'm still saving time with the 1700X. And so the takeaway from this video are a few points. One is I'm approaching this from a user's perspective and not exactly like a short-term reviewer, because I've actually been using this machine for 3 months extensively. So, you know, it's kind of unfortunate that I've stumbled upon those issues that were frustrating. But of course, in the end, once I did the reinstall, I realized that that was my mistake. And number 2, the Ryzen 7 1700X and the 1700 deliver such a good value for a multitasking processor, so I could be doing things in the background that are really heavy and occupy like 100% of the CPU on all 16 threads, but not really feeling the system bogged down while I'm checking email, watching other YouTube 4K videos, or anything else in the foreground that isn't as intensive. And while I am approaching this from a video production standpoint, it does apply to really anything CPU intensive. And so I'm gonna say it one more time that switching to Ryzen for our workstation and PCs has not been a mistake. I'm really happy that we did, despite the hiccups along the way, you know, as long as everything is ironed out, and it has been for the most part. And the fact that we can save 10 hours every 3 months, that's 40 hours a year. That's an entire work week in a year that my computer is not rendering videos. That is important. But I do have Coffee Lake coming to me, and I'm excited to try it out in a production environment just like I did with Ryzen to see if it would be worth the switch. So make sure to subscribe and check out these other relevant videos regarding Ryzen. We've made plenty. I hope you guys enjoyed this little 3-month update process, and if you are on Ryzen, what has your experience been like? Let me know in the comments below. I'm Dmitry. We'll see you in the next video. Isn't it awesome how quiet this machine is? I love this compact package.